Hello, everyone. I'd just like to welcome everyone who is joining us today for the launch of The Wig-Maker by Janet Gallant and Sharon Thiessen. We are so very glad to be gathering here today on Zoom from far and wide. Certainly, we would love to be in person celebrating, but for now, we are so very glad that you could all join us. First, we would like to acknowledge that here at New Star Books, we are broadcasting from and have the solemn privilege of working on the stolen territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This land was never ceded, sold, or given up. And in the nature of this virtual event, we would like to extend an invitation for everyone in the audience here to take a moment and acknowledge and pay respects to the First Nations peoples of the land upon which you are residing today. Before we introduce our host and our authors this evening, we would just like to make note of a few things. First of all, this launch is being recorded and will be available in the coming days to share and watch again. Be sure that you check our email newsletter and are following us on our social media accounts at New Star Books to stay up to date so that you don't miss any of that. We will also be making use of the Q&A feature here in this Zoom event, which will be at the bottom of your windows there. If you don't wish to have your name appearing in the recording, feel free to submit your questions anonymously. Additionally, we would also like to make mention of the heavy themes that are at the center of the Wig-Maker and encourage you to do what is needed to take care of yourself during this launch event, should you need to. But we do hope you enjoy yourself, and now I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our host for this evening. Kerry Gilbert lives in Vernon, where she teaches creative writing at the Okanagan College. Her first book, Kaplunk, is a verse novel of development and was published in 2005 by Kamalka Press, my apologies. Her second book of poetry, Tight Wire, was published in 2016 with Mother Tongue, and Little Red is a new verse collection also with Mother Tongue, which was released in March of 2019. Gilbert has won the Gwendolyn McEwen Poetry Award for Best Suite by an Emerging Writer and was shortlisted for Relit, the Ralph Gustafson Prize for Best Poem, and the Pacific Spirit Poetry Contest. I will hand it over to Kerry now, and she should be joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Melissa. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you, everyone, for coming. What a wonderful turnout for this celebration today. And thank you both, Melissa and Rolf, for asking me to be the host for this evening. It's an honor for me to be so. I can also speak for Sharon and Janet to say that it's an honor for us to be joining you this evening respectfully from the unceded territory and traditional lands of the Salish people. And I agree with what Melissa said. It would be great if everybody can put in the chat where they're joining us from tonight. And the chat will be printed off later on for both Janet and Sharon to read later after the fact. So our itinerary for this evening is that I'm going to give some introductions to both Janet and Sharon. And they are both going to do a reading from the Wig-Maker. And then the three of us will be having a discussion about some of the main topics within the novel. And then at the very end, there's going to be a Q&A. So if you could please save any and all questions to the end, that would be really appreciated. And as Melissa mentioned, we'll be using the Q&A function to ask questions. So it is my deepest pleasure to introduce you to two of the lovely humans that we're celebrating tonight. Sharon Thiessen is author of 12 books of poetry, editor of 2 editions of the New Long Poem Anthology, and Professor Emerita of Creative Writing at UBC's Okanagan campus. 3 of Sharon Thiessen's previous books have been finalists for the Governor General's Award for Literature, The Good Bacteria, The Beginning of the Long Dash, and Confabulations. She has also won the Pat Lowther Award for A Pair of Scissors and has been a finalist for the Dorothy Livesey Poetry Prize for Oyama Pink Shale and for The Good Bacteria. Janet Gallant, the Wig-Maker, is mother of 2 grown daughters. After 30 years in Calgary, where she worked as an office administrator, most recently in the renewable energy sector, she relocated to Lake Country, BC, where she now works as a wig maker and a consultant for women with alopecia. After her relocation to Lake Country, Gallant and Thiessen, neighbors at first, became friends. And it's such a great story about how they became friends. But they were spending an evening together, waiting to find out if they needed to be evacuated from a fire. And within that time of waiting in a living room, Gallant wanted to tell her story and Thiessen wanted to hear it. Janet insisted that she wasn't a writer, and Sharon is an established Canadian poet and editor. Thus began what has turned out to be this tale. In an interview with Paul E. Nelson, he says, "The song comes from you, Janet, but through the filter of Sharon." To me, the wig maker represents what can happen when we are delicate with each other's stories. Sharon says in that interview with Paul E. Nelson that poetry is the truth of experience and goes towards the unsayable always. And this friendship, this collaboration helped turn tragedy into poetry. Janet says in the same interview that music is her poetry, and it is this dialogue between poet and storyteller that made the unsayable sayable. I think we can all use this kind of gentle listening and opening and caring for each other's stories, especially after the year we just had. We have a lot to learn from the wig maker about shared humanity and resiliency and love and grief and growth and the power of being courageous within our human condition. Eve Joseph says, "The wig maker asks the reader to lean in and listen. It asks the world to fall silent in order that we may hear the intimate whispers between the lines." There are two voices in this book, one whose story goes in search of its music, the other who has to make of the cries the very first notes of the song. The work of repair does not deny the original wound. In fact, it cannot happen without it. A fealty to the truth creates a kind of shimmer. Impossible to miss that fitful, tremulous light in what can only be called a work of heartbreaking brilliance. So lovely audience, please welcome, lean in and listen to Sharon Thiessen and Janet Gallant and all that they've worked so beautifully hard to say. Janet and Sharon, do you want to turn your cameras and your mics on and join us?
My host has to help me with that one. There we go. It's not letting me.
Mine didn't come on either.
There we go. There we go. Hi, everybody.
All right, Sharon and Janet, you would like to start off with a reading tonight.
Yeah. Kerry, that was beautiful.
Thank you, Kerry.
That was beautiful. I have to tell you, these are my words and it's my story, but to hear it described so beautifully. Yeah, I hope everybody's got a little bit of tissue tonight. And Kerry's introduction is a beautiful segue into my first reading tonight. Gosh, I think back the first day I ever spoke to Rolf, I was getting ready to write the introduction, which I wanted to write separately from Sharon. I didn't want her to see it until it was done, because not only was it an introduction to the book, but it was also a way for me to say thank you, my dear friend, for what you've given me and what we've accomplished. I love you to bits. So, beautiful segue, Kerry. I'm going to take us to a portion of the introduction. So I'm going to start, we're all over at Sharon and Paul's, having a sip of wine and some munchies, getting to know each other. And so this, I'm going to start a few days after that event. Several days later, This time without wine. We sat together again, and it was decided. Sharon offered to take the pen. Somehow she knew I was ready to tell, needed to tell. At first, we'd meet once a month, then every couple of weeks. Later, thanks to publishing deadlines, every few days. I'd talk, Sharon would listen and type. I'd cry, Sharon would cry with me and type. Many times, I would be struggling to express myself. I'd be without words to articulate certain feelings. But these times are the moments that would keep us going, keep us both going. In these moments, Sharon would pull one of her books from the overstuffed bookshelves, those shelves right behind you, floor to ceiling bookshelves. Without hesitation, she would flip through a few pages, scroll swiftly over the words with her finger, then she would recite a passage or two, each time presenting parallels that would go above and beyond analogy. It really was, and continues to be, magical, this collaboration, this friendship. We are writing this book due to my lifelong need to tell the story of my brother Billy, dead by suicide before his 14th birthday, to tell the story of our sister, dead at the age of 40, our sister Penny, dead at the age of 40, ravaged by breast cancer after suffering her entire adult life on the streets of Canada with schizophrenia. The story of innocence lost, taken by the one called father, overlooked by the lady of the house. A story of 3 generations of women, my grandmother, my mother, and my sister Penny, whose lives and loved ones were taken by the same mental illness. My friend Melissa asked me if music would be woven into this telling. She knows how important music was to me, is to me. I told her I hadn't considered it at that point. She got me thinking. I looked forward to following up with Melissa, to let her know it worked out, to let her know the music is indeed here. Lyrics of truth and notes of healing are here. I would tell Melissa that an editor friend of mine, an admirer of Sharon's poetic talents, helped me answer this one. He was kind enough to provide me with guidance as I wrote this introduction. I quote him below. I think he answers Melissa's question beautifully. And if I may quote Rolf, most of us think of poetry as having come out of music, or at least out of the same place that music comes. A term used to describe Sharon is that she is a lyric poet, poetry being the lyrics to invisible songs. You and Sharon are singing together. Thanks, Rolf. I just love that. Sharon, it's your turn, love.
I'll just read a couple of paragraphs from a prose afterword that I wrote to kind of pull together a number of the strands that are dancing throughout the book. I refer fairly frequently to Russian writer Svetlana Alexievich, who wrote a book of transcribed a book of accounts by Soviet women fighters in the Second World War. It's called The Unwomanly Face of War, an oral history of women in World War II. And this book came along at just the right time when in the process of doing the book with Janet, we weren't exactly clear. We knew we were doing this, but sometimes the directions got cloudy. And this book by Alexievich really consolidated for me a strong sense of the kind of rightness and beauty of what we were doing. Women's stories are different writes Svetlana Alexievich, and about different things. What strikes me about the way Janet tells her story is how much of it is about her love for and care of her siblings, her attempts to understand her mother's and her father's behavior, her desire to know more about their family histories, to have a relative tell her something, anything, an anecdote, a memory, a rumor, so she could put together an explanation. I just want a story, she says, but no one wants to talk to her. Leave the past in the past, they say. But it turns out that this telling, the text of the Wig-Maker, is the story that has begun to show her her true identity. Quote, she says, the universe was telling me this all along, she says.
All right, I'm going to take us next to the page that introduces my brother Ian. This one, when I think of Ian, it makes me very happy. After everything, Ian has become one of the favorite men in my world. One of my favorites, definitely. With nothing, he's managed to become this amazing, loving husband, an adoring father, and he's always been my dearest friend. I'm so proud of you, Ian. I love you to bits. Ian, look at how the children have suffered. Penny, Billy, me. Beverly was given up for adoption. Luckily for Ian, he had a psyche that protected him. Ian didn't take any beatings by my father after Billy died. He'd gotten the fist, but nothing like Billy. Ian was good at staying out of trouble, just like me. He didn't talk back. He did what he was told. No trouble at school. He too was haunted by the moans of his brother being beaten, but his psyche was able to blank it out. 10 years later, all of a sudden, he found himself sobbing for his brother. He was way too young, barely 10 years old, and lost his big brother, his roommate, grounded for smoking cigarette. We were all addicted from my parents smoking in the house. My dad gave me a carton of smokes for my 15th birthday, probably symbolic to him. As long as he could keep up the sexual abuse, not until I left home did it stop. There's a moan out there in the universe. If you are quiet enough to listen, you hear a lot of things you don't usually hear.
In one of the few existing photos from Janet's childhood, you see a piece of half-dead scrappy lawn and a shabby building wall. Her father sitting and smoking on a set of plain wooden steps leading to a front door. Doreen's brother sits beside him. Janet talks about stairs, tops of stairs, bottoms of stairs, where the door opened onto, and where Tom nearly killed Penny when he came charging through the door one time, raging drunk. Tom is Tom McCrate. It was at the top of the stairs that Janet's mother stood, a shadowy presence now in memory, but at the time, the last glimpse of her mother 3-year-old Janet had. There were no goodbyes, at least no meaningful or memorable ones. It's possible her mother went out to meet some friends that night and never returned. Tom later told Janet her mother had run off with another man. Her mother was a whore. How he'd caught her before that, saying she was going out to meet a girlfriend, but had fancy clothes stuffed into her handbag. Janet remembers an energy of fear around this time. As for downstairs, that is where Tom fooled around with screws and bolts, pretending to make things, and where Janet would later undergo tea time. She remembers hearing the ting sound of small metal things being dropped into containers. Soon would come his request for a cup of tea. You okay, Janet?
I'm okay. We're gonna get through this. This one's probably the tough one.
Yeah.
The neighbor. The next door neighbor. Red-headed, Irish or Scottish. I'll never forget him. I was in kindergarten and I went over to play with his son. It was time to go home, so he sent his son to bed and took me down to the basement. Just like tea time with my dad. Somehow he knew I wouldn't tell, and I didn't. I'm in Toronto in grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, looking for boys' attention, older, big boys who wanted to touch me. That's what love meant. My dad was such a liar. It was all about perception. I had to be a refined lady. I never carried myself like a slut, not even nail polish. I was perfect. I fooled them all, to the point where I fooled myself. I was fictitious. I wore nice suits. By the time you're 6, you're a double agent. In a world that feels this way, the soul knows something's wrong. The moan is the vibration of the soul. Since I could never speak my truths, how could I sing them? I never felt worthy. I felt like a fraud. The truth is in the music. The truth is in the moan, Billy's moan. The moan on the slave ships. Everything that is wrong is in this story. That's about as deep as I'm going to get with you all this evening.
Okay. Page 94. Okay. Who is the teller in this story? And who is the listener? And who is the recorder? As Alexovich writes, quote, I often see how they sit and listen to themselves, to the sound of their own soul. They check it against the words, unquote. You do this, she says, to, quote, answer your own question. Why did all this happen to me? You gaze at everything almost from the other side. There is no longer any need to deceive anyone or yourself, unquote. I want to say here that I'm immensely grateful to poets John Lent and Jake Kennedy for their recommendation to me of Alexovich's book. Her book records the harrowing memories of Soviet women who fought in World War II and survived. But in Alexovich's non-intrusive approach, I felt a smidgen of kinship and a huge appreciation for what she says about these women and their ways of talking about their experiences, not to mention how devastating their experiences were even to read about. I listen, Alexovich says, and she says, pain is the proof of past life. There are no other proofs. I don't trust other proofs. Words have more than once led us away from the truth. I think of suffering as the highest form of information, having a direct connection with mystery, with the mystery of life, unquote. When asked by a friend of hers why she was doing this, Janet told her that she wanted the world to say her brother's and her sister's names just once, to know what they went through, and that she wants someone to grieve for Penny, even if just for a moment. So I think that's our reading.
I've got one more, love.
You got one more? Oh, okay.
So, man, this has been such a journey. Without a doubt, the most healing journey I've ever been on. And I just feel so hopeful and so tall and so free. And there truly is a happy ending. because my name is Janet Gallant. So I'm going to read the chapter called And Now I'm Found. And now I'm found. I just need to breathe through this chapter. I am overfilled with joy, but I am overwhelmed. Stephen and the cousins are saying, we had a wonderful time too. Everyone's talking about how much they enjoyed meeting you. Cousin Lisa, who's really funny, said Ray was a horn dog. All three of them were. The ones still living are old, all ears and nose. The resemblance is so in my face, and it's been peeking at me for months. Reg, is that you? Ray, is that you? Now that I'm allowed to see it, I see it and embrace it. I don't need Gordon to do the DNA test. Just like going to Auntie May's house and seeing Penny's expression on her face, I know I'm related. Auntie May said, you're just like your mother. My mother was very beautiful and kind. I feel like I'm home, finally. It's so powerful. I haven't been this excited about the future. I have awesome cousins. I no longer need my Gallant half-siblings' permission to be me, Janet Gallant. Now I have to say that since we published, my family, my Gallant family, including my brother Gordon, have been nothing but loving and gracious. We're all becoming closer every time we meet, and I feel so much love and acceptance. It's wonderful. Thank you.
That was a beautiful reading, both of you. Thank you so much. And I know in this kind of scenario, you don't get the applause that you would get if we were in person. But honestly, it feels right not to. The silence that we're feeling right now, I think is more appropriate than if we were applauding. But you're getting wonderful comments in the chat. Nancy Holmes just said, what a beautiful reading and story. And I think what will be more appropriate is spending time going through those beautiful messages later. But thank you both of you for your bravery and for sharing this work with us tonight. So I have some questions for you. We're going to dig into some ideas here from the book, and then I'll open it up to some questions to everyone after. So my first question for both of you has to do with the process of working together and writing this very unique manuscript together. Janet, how did this process help you tell your story? And Sharon, how did this process compare to some of your other writing projects? So maybe Janet can go first and then Sharon, but how did it help you to tell your story?
Well, it's unexplainable to me how comfortable it was sitting with Sharon. I just knew I was in a safe place. And so for me, there was no process. It was so organic and so much like just two women, two friends sharing with each other. It was just so comfortable. And I don't even remember a time where I had to hold back, except for saying, Sharon, okay, are you sitting down? Are you ready? But it was so organic and so real. And the way she took down my words in that moment of organic realness is beautiful, as you all can see through the finished product.
So Sharon.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Janet. And I have to say that I have been so honored to be given your trust, Janet, and your story. And it's transformed me as well in many ways. And so it isn't simply that I kind of took down what you were saying. There was a flow between us for sure at many levels, and I have great affection. Janet and I have become very close, and to have that kind of care for another person, while at the same time, just, you know, she has her life and I have my life, and it's almost as if we were there was something magic and something fated somehow. Uncanny was a word that I was using in our finding each other for this. And I wanted to say that I have collaborated before. I've worked with other texts and worked with visual art, done ekphrastic work. And it seems that I am actually personally drawn to collaboration and teamwork and this and that. And that's the way I am. And so it works out really well in the end, it seems. Interestingly enough, the book before this one that Rolf and New Start published was called The Receiver. And so there was something in there that was kind of setting me up in a kind of way for this relationship and for this listening. And this book includes some verbatim text from conversations I had with Francis Boldereff, which is a whole other story. But this project was very different because I was completely in the dark. I was finding out all of this information as Janet was telling me. So it was, as Janet said, very organic process. I was, never knew what was going to happen the next time Janet came over. So,
and you never hung up the receiver.
No, I didn't. Yeah.
That's wonderful. The other process, Janet, that I think many people would be really interested in hearing about is the process of wig making. There's a really beautiful quote in here that says about wig making, eventually there comes a moment when she feels there is someone in the room with her, a life, a fate, a personality. At that point, Janet starts referring to a person in progress. Janet, can you elaborate on what that means to you and what the process of wig making is?
Sure. So one thing you got to know, you're pulling hairs, like the average human hair, Sharon, you probably have that number still. There's a lot of hairs. So there's a lot of hours that go into making a wig. And so I find myself, spending 8 hours a day. And at the time I was working for a very talented woman who does wigs in the movie business. And so I had deadlines and I'm a rookie. So I'm up all night, literally till 3 a.m. trying to get this wig done. And so a lot of time by myself. I use a magnifier and a light. So a lot of time it's dim around me. I'm up there at night. You can see the little light in the window. And I usually work with the block on my lap. And when and I start calling her she, when I get to like the last part here, which is the hairline, and she's laying on my lap, and you get tired and for a moment, you're like, who's looking at me? You know what I mean? Like you see someone watching you. Well, my wigs, I would start to feel like someone was in the room with me. And then this analogy gets stronger as I'm finding out that I'm Gallant after the DNA test. And when I take my wig off, I look very different because I have very, very gray hair now. It's really short with still a lot of holes. But when I would take off my wig, I would see Gallant. I would see, oh my gosh. And so I'm evolving, getting used to this new face, and I'm producing this wig that I want to put on this face. And so it literally becomes, I know every trail of my hairline. And as that's coming together, I feel like I'm finding myself all over again. I hope I've explained that for you.
Beautifully, really beautifully. And the metaphor is just all the way throughout the book, which is...
That's part of the magic Sharon and I are talking about. It just so organically came to be.
Yeah. And the other thing that really goes throughout is this repetition of music. And you brought that up, Janet, already. You read that really beautiful quote by Rolf already, but the part I'll read again is you and Sharon are singing together. And you really feel that when you're reading this book, this song. Sharon, can you talk about some of the lyrical choices that you made to sing with Janet? And then Janet, maybe afterwards, can you speak to how or why music was important to you for this? Sharon, do you want to start?
Yes, and I think for as far as music goes, my interest is more in rhythm than melody. And at a certain point, I figured out that a long sort of stepped triadic line would best convey the rhythms of Janet's speaking, because what would happen is she would talk and I would type what she was saying, and then so I'd make a transcript, but that was already sort of somewhat lineated according to the rhythms of her speech. It wasn't just one long paragraph. So it already was like that. And I want to say as well that Janet has been with me through the whole kind of editing process. There's nothing in this book that she didn't okay. I gave her all the transcripts, the original transcripts, so she has a copy of all of that. And then as I was working it out with the poetry, I would give her sections of that too, to make sure everything was accurate and that there was nothing in there she didn't want in there, and so on. So we did have to make some editorial choices about content, which I am really glad we did. Anyway, so I wanted to somehow rhythmically organize the various disclosures and in such a way that it wasn't a kind of standard or conventional sort of narrative, but that it would bring in threads that would all kind of echo each other as the story went on. And also, we both were discovering the story beneath the story as we were meeting. So there was all of that as well. But I liked, it felt good to do it that way. Because it wasn't kind of pushing the past forward in some kind of artificial or formal way, because that's not how it was working anyway. So it was more like what I wrote here is that the lines, almost like the trident, form almost like in music a chord, C-H-O-R-D. Voice, word, and image are all there at once. So I think that's what gives it a kind of immediacy and directness that a kind of third-person narrative or chronological narrative. This is somewhat chronological because you want the reader to be able to follow it, but it wasn't. But it does kind of. Works almost more like a musical composition overall, I would say.
Yeah, and Janet, what about music for you and why that was important for you and throughout?
Well, music for me, period. It's my church. It's my, I always wanted to be a singer. If I had any regret in life, it's not taking care of myself to do that. So for me, music was the only escape. I grew up with the radio and a few channels, the channels you could get for free. But for me, music was everything. It was church. It was validation. There's always someone singing a song that you can relate to. when I would try to write, it would be writing a song. I never even thought of it as poetry back then, or when I was in it. To me, it was about writing a song. And so sitting with Sharon, and again, that back and forth, she'd wheel on that chair of hers with wheels, grab a book, come up with, you know, literally flip through, oh yeah, I got this. It was like she was giving me the words to bridge into the next chorus, you know what I mean, the next verse. And then evident the way the book is laid out, which is Sharon's doing, I wrote those words by speaking them, and she added the music, she added the rhythm. That's magic. And we did it by mistake. That is magic.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm finally singing. It's beautiful.
It is. And I love the lines that you and Sharon are singing together. It's the perfect description of what is happening in this book, and it is really beautiful. You talk about Sharon rolling on her chair to get a book. And I like, Sharon, that you read from Svetlana Alexievich in what you were reading, because I think that became really important to you as a connector for what you were doing and how you were doing this. At the very beginning of the book, there's a quote by Svetlana that says, "Remembering is not a passionate or dispassionate retelling of a reality that is no more, but a new birth of the past when time goes in reverse. Above all, it is creativity. As they narrate, people create. They write their life. They draw the words out themselves, not from newspapers or books that they have read, not from others." And that was from the book, The Unwomanly Face of War, an oral history of women in World War II. So Sharon, in your poetry workshops that you've held, you use the phrase, "everything belongs." You've said that quite a few times. And I have it on a Post-it note in my office, in my writing office. How did Svetlana belong to the Wig-Maker? How did that happen for you?
Well, yeah, I think when I say everything belongs, I think that we don't need to partition reality for the sake of what we think of as poetry. So certainly Alexievich's book belongs in this conversation because she articulates for me so much of the beauty of this kind of relationship. I mean, she went and listened to the stories of these women who had fought. And I just wanted to read this one bit because she says, not everyone ventures to write down their memories, and not everyone succeeds in entrusting to paper their feelings and thoughts. And then over and over again, the women she interviewed would say, tears hamper me, tears hamper me. And so here's a couple of examples. And this is, I suppose, to use a word, companionship. I feel companionship with this book. Okay, here's V. Gromova, a medical assistant. "I have enough metal in me. I carry a fragment from a wound I received near Vitebsk in my lung, within an inch of my heart, a second fragment in the right lung, 2 in the region of the stomach. Here is my address. Come, I cannot write more. I don't see anything for my tears." Here's V. Voronova, telephone operator. "I have no big decorations, only medals. I don't know whether you would be interested in my life, but I would like to tell it to somebody." And here's Alexandra Boyko, first lieutenant, tankman. She says, "There were quite a few girl tankmen of medium-sized tanks, but I was the only one who worked on a heavy tank. I sometimes think it would be good if some writer wrote about my life. I do not know how to do it myself."
Here, here.
When she says women's stories are different and about different things, I think, these women, you read these stories, they worry, like we worry about our kids, we worry about other people, and our spouses and love and relationships. And I think that sometimes women feel that they have to stuff their stories into a kind of masculinist heroic narrative, that's overcoming and achieving success and riches and being famous and that kind of trajectory. But I think it's much more complex in a kind of underground way that women speak and even speak to each other. And I think that the vulnerability here is the key. It's the Rebecca Solnit, I think her name is, written a book where she talks about the non-existence of women, and that non-existence is what I feel as that sort of underground path, like water, moving through life, through the organicness of life, to find itself where it has to go. So all of those things, I think, have come into the way in which I could relate to what Alexovich was doing in this book.
And I think it's also applicable that you help each other tell this story.
Yes.
Women help each other tell the story of the wig maker. That seems to be a really important connection. And you brought up vulnerability as part of that too. That was my next question. Janet, can you speak to the vulnerability of working in autobiography? And then on the same side of that, Sharon, can you speak about the vulnerability of being a poet? Why is it important that we tell women's stories? And why was it important that we told this story in verse, in poetry? So maybe Janet, do you mind going first and talk?
No, not at all. Vulnerability in working on autobiography. Oh my gosh, well, I think it's the definition. I'm putting it literally all out there. Like, except for standing here naked before you, it's all out there. And that was for me the toughest part, the actual telling. The surprise that I got, I never thought for a moment that all of the love that I'm feeling and you see the comments, I can see them flipping on the bottom. That too opens up vulnerabilities. Stress can be good or bad. And so just like the stress and the vulnerability of telling the story, now receiving word from my loved ones and strangers after telling that autobiography, it's overwhelming. And some days I'm so filled with joy that I can't take it. Like I said, Sharon, I gotta go lay down. I'm running over. I just can't even take it anymore. Vulnerability, I tell you, when someone's vulnerable and when it goes on for a long time, vulnerability makes human beings put up walls and defenses. Mother Nature is vulnerable right now. Look what's going on. Our governments are vulnerable. Look at what's going on in the Canadian Armed Forces right now. There's going to be a lot of defenses going up. There's going to be a lot of reaction. And sometimes that can lead us down the wrong path. I made a promise to myself when I knew we were getting close to publishing, and I started my life coaching with a dear, dear friend of mine who runs Sage Life Coaching. I promised myself I wouldn't allow the vulnerability to put up any more walls, and that I would just march through it and finally let Janet be who she needs to be. That's vulnerability to me.
Sharon, is there vulnerability in being a poet?
Oh, I think so. Don't you, Kerry? Yeah. I don't know. It's a vulnerability that in some ways is essential to being a poet. that if you're not vulnerable, if you're not, in some sense, kind of have open to life, I don't think your poetry is going to be very alive. So that openness, of course, like the thing we used to laugh our heads off about, Shelley saying, "I fall upon the thorns of life, I plead." Yes. And but there's something to that. I'm not Janet is a crier. I am not a crier. Janet would come over and she'd be crying, but I found myself very much in tears at times, sitting there sobbing, typing, well, not sobbing, but tears. And I have to say that the whole process of putting this long poem together, I had a lump in my throat for close to a year. This was not easy to write, and I could feel it, as I was writing it, I could feel it. And so I think maybe that is also what gives this particular text a kind of power, because I think I've read the whole thing about 3 times now, and each time I read it, I have this tingle and shivers that go up my body, my legs, and I'm thinking that those are what I call truth tingles, or there's some truth in this that is so naked and so open, but at the same time, it's aesthetically and rhythmically appropriate. And so I think I stumbled on something that really worked for both Janet and me, and I'm really, really proud of Janet, what she's been through, and how hard this was. And she's great. You can tell, right?
Yes, I am.
So yeah, it's been a very, very, it's an unrepeatable experience for sure. This is a
Yeah, we're never doing this again.
All right, I have one more question, and then I'll open up to some of the questions that others have been asking.
Great.
I think one of the things that we can celebrate the most about this book, there are many things, by the way, but just one, is how much it breaks the silence for you, Janet, and by telling your story. To both of you, this question is both of you, how important is it to have advocates and allies in telling our stories? Do you feel like you became that for each other? And do you feel like in Canada in 2021, that you had the full freedom and support to tell the story that you wanted to tell, the way that you wanted to tell it? So how important is it to have advocates to break the silence? Maybe Sharon, do you mind starting first, and then we'll finish with Janet?
Sure. Well, I think the current sort of popularity of therapy, where it seems, it used to be like, oh, you're seeing a therapist, but now it's like normal healthcare or something. And so, but that's a kind of private advocacy, empowering and clarifying and so on, which is great. But a kind of public advocacy. See, the whole thing about speaking for another person is really loaded and really tricky. And this became a bit of an issue, to put it, horribly bluntly, I'm white, and
I'm not.
she's not. And so, this becomes a very fraught situation in contemporary Canadian poetry and politics. So, thank goodness for Rolf and New Star in standing with us in this project and supporting us all the way. I was turned down for grants, and I'm sure precisely because of this advocacy and kind of speaking for, presumably, someone else, which I don't know. I think the language is speaking for it, not me, you know. But yes, and I have to say that I'm really, really thrilled and knocked out with how wonderfully this book is being received. And Eve Joseph's beautiful, beautiful blurb is proof to me that this is a book that can be experienced by someone who herself has a complex history, as real and truthful and alive, and that to me was the best what am I going to say, praise, I guess, that we could have gotten, and the best encouragement that we'd done the right thing and done it the right way.
And Janet, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I absolutely had an ally in Miss Thiessen sitting here with us. So that goes without saying. She walked this journey with me every single step of the way. Do I feel comfortable in Canada in 2021? Getting there. You know, social media can be a wonderful place, and social media can be a not so wonderful place. And just over the last couple of days, I've experienced a few things. I posted the welcome to the launch on some CFB Canada websites, and I'm just going to put it out there because it's upsetting, and it wasn't very well received, and the timing isn't that great for the folks I want to receive this work, but I think that's the best time for them to open it up and read it, because what is going on, and I'll get out of the politics immediately, I promise, what is going on in CFB Canada, the Canadian Armed Forces right now at the high levels, I am a product of what happens at the bottom of all of that. I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you for answering all my questions, both of you. You did a beautiful job of that. There are questions from others. So I'm going to start going through some of these for you. From Stephen Gallant, the words are powerful. Equally powerful is what is not said, the negative space, as it were. What was the process of determining how much to say about the abuse?
I'm going to give this one to Sharon. That's Stephen Gallant, my beautiful cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thanks, Stephen. I think it was my, perhaps my skills as an editor, which is not so much my skills as an editor, but my ability to imagine a completed text, and to imagine readership, and to imagine reader reception, and also, so I made some executive decisions about things that I thought we should leave out, and Janet ultimately agreed with that, and she's really happy we did now. Yeah, so it was a matter of hitting a tone, getting the right, getting enough, but not too much, and so I think these are things really that my long experience in editing and teaching both prose and poetry have given me the kind of instincts and skills for. And I think that this book is enough. I think there's enough, and there's always lots of room for you know, for Janet, if she speaks about the book or wants to tell more in certain circumstances, that she can. But the book as it is, I think, is, I mean, people find it difficult enough to take in everything that's there already. So yeah, it was just it was just editing. Yeah.
And a darn good job of editing.
There's a question from M.L. Martin. A dear poet friend of mine who writes on her own trauma and also teaches workshops on how to write about trauma told me that she teaches her students to incorporate self-care in their writing process and introduces them to methods of self-care. I'm wondering if this kind of necessary self-care was part of, for either of you, of your process, and if you have any general advice for writers writing on trauma.
Sharon, you can go and speak to that.
Yeah, Janet. Janet was saying that she found that she is now doing some life coaching with her friend Lisa. And I don't know. Every once in a while, Janet and I would just have to get together and, you know, enjoy ourselves or relax a bit. But I think for me, it certainly was, as I was saying earlier, transformative for me. And I think all of that kind of just took place within our relationship. We kind of, we're both kind of just helped each other through it. And yeah, there were tears, there were, hot bubble baths late at night. There were overindulgences, all the things that people do. And there were laughter, and there was friendship, and there were going for walks and going out for lunch and stuff like that. So we took care of each other pretty well, I think.
Yeah, we sure did. For me, it was a good solid 2 years of getting together, weekly, bi-weekly. It was a really dark place for me for a good part of it. And that is why I took on my life coaching with Lisa, because I don't think you can write something like this or tell something like this without being in it. It's in your head, and it's been in my head for 50 years. So I was in it, and there was some times where it got really dark, where I was afraid of being in it a little too deep. And so I'm well into 4 months now of coaching and learning how to take down those barriers. And so the transformation is going on right now. And I tell you, I don't go to bed thinking about this anymore. I've already figured out a way with Lisa, with working with Lisa, to shut that off. It's very powerful. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Fantastic. There's a question from Nancy Holmes. Sharon, you have often spoken eloquently about lyric thinking. How might that kind of thinking connect to what I see in the process of this book? Lyric listening or lyric scribing?
Nancy, I think I think probably all three are operating at once. One sometimes more than another, but it's a kind of, it isn't just that you're listening to a person. A person's voice is more than just their voice. It's themselves, it's their history, it's their sound, the sound of their being. And so I think in the sense in which I was talking earlier about everything belonging or not partitioning, I think that holistic kind of back and forth of listening, speaking, writing, it all became like one chord, as I was saying earlier. And the lyrical is very often taken to be sort of just dancing through the tulips or something like that, but it isn't. It's the deepest song of our selves and of reality and of nature. And So to catch that, to catch those rhythms, to catch that sound is part of, I think, what one does or experiences as when you're composing something lyric or poetic. And it's a mystery, and it's also, there's something very holy about it. And I use that word both in its spiritual sense and in its earthy, holistic sense. That's where everything belongs, where the dark belongs with the light that turns into dark, that turns into light, and it just keeps sort of rolling along. So I don't know if I've answered that question coherently, but I thank you for it, Nancy. Yeah.
And Janet, the next question's for you from Lisa Smith. She says, I have so much respect for your strength, but more for your intentional healing and ultimate success as a human. Tell us how the journey has helped you as a mother to your beautiful daughters.
Oh gosh, good one, Lisa. Lisa's the one that I quote as funny in the book. She's my new cousin on the Gallant side. Oh gosh. I made a point of not sharing this side of my world with my daughters when they were growing up. I intentionally never told them my story. I sat them down 2 summers ago when Sharon and I decided we were going to write this, and had to tell my daughters what was going on. And I think both of them, well, my youngest said, Mom, I knew. She just instinctively knew. But the 2 of them have already congratulated me on the way I project my feelings or my frustrations or my happiness. Whatever Lisa and I are doing there in my life coaching is working. I have had the 2 most precious moments as a mother with each of my daughters separately because of this book. It has brought us closer together. I think they understand their mom more than they ever have, and they're proud of me. And to me, that's success. They're beautiful, healthy, nature-loving women that I'm very proud of. So that's my success.
Well, and Janet, I'm pretty sure this next question comes from one of those beautiful daughters of yours. It says, a question for my mom, Janet. How do you plan to use your voice and story moving forward? What is your next step on this journey beyond the Wig-Maker, using the momentum it has given you?
Good one, Samantha. Just give me a moment. I really feel blessed to have had this opportunity. And I'm not going to let it go to waste. I really want to give back. I want to make a difference. And I think it's going to have something to do with children or young adults, boys and girls who have gone through what I've gone through. If there's some way I can stop it if it's happening to them right now, or if there's some way I can lift them up to help them get out of it, that's what I hope comes my way.
There's another question for you, Janet, if you're up for it.
I'm up for it.
I can try and find another one for Sharon.
No, I'm up for it. Let me have it. Robert
Gallant asks, how did the connection with the Gallant family come about?
Well, Robert won the DNA number prize when I took my DNA test. So I was looking for my mother's firstborn. He was taken from her when he was born. She was told that he was dead when he was born, and he's alive and walking. Anyway, so I took the test hoping he was looking for his family. And who's at the top of my DNA list? But Robert Gallant. And I'm thinking, I don't know any Gallants. And so I sent him an email and said, you win. We have the highest numbers. How are we related? And if it wasn't for Robert's open heart and answering all of my questions, I would never have found my Gallant family. So I'm so glad that he is so into genealogy and that he happened to be there for me that day, and the rest is history. Gallant.
And Sharon, Robert has a question for you also. He says, as a musician myself and a songwriter, the first thing I noticed was the format of the book was similar to that of songwriting. Was that the intent of the format for you?
No, it wouldn't have occurred to me to as songwriting, but I'll tell you something, Robert, which is, I think, one of the 2 or 3 top moments in the story of this book is when the books arrived from New Star, and Janet was over at her place and I was here. We each had a box on our front step, and I opened it, and Paul was with me, and he picked up a copy, opened it, and I felt such a flood of relief. And I said to him, thank God, it looks like poetry. It looked like poetry. And I don't know why I thought it might not, but it was almost like a revelation to me that, yes, it was poetry. It had been turned into a poem. And I have to say here too, all credit is due to Rolf Moore at New Star. From the beginning, he encouraged and suggested and kind of gently pushed me in the direction of poetry for this book. We had a few conversations and threw some ideas around, and that's really a long overdue, at least in this conversation, note of appreciation to Rolf.
Wonderful. There's one more question I'm going to read out. There are a couple of other questions that are more personal that I'll leave for you guys to answer individually to some people. But Hannah Calder will do your question last. Did writing the book bring up new memories and change old memories?
No, not for me. No. I can't think of anything. No. No. I spent way too long with those images in my head. There wasn't room for any new ones. No.
I think for me, it wasn't that, I had some kind of, ideal situation when I was growing up. And I think that for me, Janet's story kind of opened, some thinking, some loneliness, some pain in myself. And I told her a few things about things I'd experienced, and ways in which in a very, very superficial kind of small way, our stories were somewhat similar, but very somewhat. But so it kind of cracked me open as well, and forced me in a way to kind of accept the fact of certain pain of my own.
And Boomer has something to say about that also.
The pizza's here.
Thank you for all of those questions. They were very thoughtful and really wonderful. Pamela Parker has asked where we can buy this wonderful book. And I know Rolf wanted to join us and say a few words. And I believe Rolf was going to talk about where you can buy this beautiful book. So here's Rolf.
Hi, thank you all. It's really, I've been really worried about coming on since about 5 or 10 minutes into Janet and Sharon's reading and talk, because I started realizing, boy, it's really going to be hard coming in after that. Thank you, Kerry, for really doing a fantastic hosting job. And thank you to Janet and to Sharon for one of the most powerful book launches and reading events I've ever attended. And that's remarkable because I think for the last year, all of us in the book trade and readers, poets, book publishers, booksellers have been trying to make this work on this strange medium. And people I think are getting the hang of different things. Things are different. Some things are working better. The talent part of it, this has just been such a great event tonight. The probably were other parts that we're not doing as well. And one of the ways that we're still suffering, obviously, is the milling around the canopy table and having drinks and seeing our friends. So much of an event like this is the interaction that happens away from the podium, and so much that we're also missing a lot of is the interaction between the readers and the live audience. But within those challenges and constraints, I thought that was a really fantastic event that you guys did tonight. So I thank you very much for that. And more generally, I thank you for an incredibly brave book. And I'm gratified by the response that it has been getting before tonight and seeing it tonight. And I imagine many of you already have copies of the book, but if you don't, this is the other big dilemma about these events. We miss that shrinking pile of Janet and Sharon's book in the corner that we would normally see. And so today, I'm not going to hold everybody to this. Some people have a more difficult time getting to a bookstore than others. But if you have the opportunity, don't hit buy tonight. Don't buy the book at the launch as you normally would at a book launch. Go down to your local bookstore or phone or email your local bookstore and tell them about this wonderful book and tell them you would like to buy a copy of this book the next time you're down there or at their curb or however they're operating. So, and I say that partly because over the past difficult year in this trade that we're in, we have, one of the stories that we have seen is the strength and resilience of the book trade, and especially booksellers. I think it is no exaggeration that throughout North America, bookstores have saved publishing's ass in the last 12 months. And I think it would be a really good way of acknowledging that and thanking booksellers for that by asking them to get your copy of Sharon's and Janet's book for them. So yeah, thanks. Thank you all for attending. It's really powerful evening and really gratifying to not see you there, but to sense you all there.
Rolf, if I may, this is the first time Rolf and I have met. We've talked on the phone. I just wanted to look you in the eye, sir, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for this opportunity.
Thank you, and thank you too.
Yes, thank you, Rolf. I've already spoken about how much I appreciate your guidance through this process, your belief and your faith in this project. And I also want to Kerry, thank you so much for your really beautiful contextualizing, your thoughtful, intelligent, informed questions and your guidance through this launch tonight, and your beautiful presence. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you everyone for coming. That was an amazing turnout from lots of wonderful people. And have a wonderful night, everyone.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks y'all for coming.
Yeah, too bad you didn't live here. You could come over for pizza now, Kerry.
I'll be there in 20 minutes.
Oh yeah.